Let's discuss about the conflict process. There are the different stages which constitute a conflict. The first stage is the potential opposition or incompatibility. There are the three important points which occur in this stage. The first one is the semantic difficulties that result in the differences in training, selective perception, and inadequate information. So semantic difficulties means that the same meanings are being understood or interpreted by the different persons in the different ways. So communication as a source of conflict represents those opposing forces that arise from semantic difficulties, misunderstandings, and the noise in the communication channels. This insufficient exchange of information and noise in the communication channel are all the barriers to the communication and potential antecedents to the conflict. The second important component is the structure. It includes the size and the specialization of the jobs, then jurisdictional clarity and ambiguity, then members' goal incompatibility, leadership styles that may be close or participative, reward systems, dependence and interdependence of the groups. Let's discuss each of these points, that how this structural components can contribute towards the initiation of the conflict within the organization or within the group or team. Size and specialization act as the forces to stimulate the conflict. The larger the group and more specialized its activities, the greater the likelihood of conflict. For example, if the group size or the team size is lesser, then there will be the less chances of conflict. But if the group size or the team size is greater, there will be more chances of this conflict to be occurred in that group or team. Similarly, the potential for the conflict is greatest where the group members are younger and turnover is high, and the group greater the ambiguity in responsibility for the action lies, the greater the potential for the conflict. Whenever there will be less clarity and more ambiguity within the team members, there will be more chances of conflict within that particular team or group. Then the diversity of goals among the groups is a major source of conflict. The more diversified the goals on which the group members are being focused, the more chances of the conflict will be there. Similarly, the leadership style may play a very important role in creating the conflict. There can be the different styles of leadership, for example, closed leadership or the participative leadership. In case of participative sort of leadership, there will be less chances of conflict within the group or team. But whenever your leader is closed leader and he's not believing on the participation of the different individuals, then there will be more chances of conflict. Similarly, reward systems can stimulate the conflict. If the reward systems are found to create conflict when one member's gain is at another's expense. For example, in case of win-loss situation, there will be more chances of conflict because one of the party will be a 100% gainer and the other party will be the 100% loser. So whenever the two parties add their two extreme positions, there will be the more chances of conflict between these parties. Finally, if the group is independent to another group, opposing forces are stimulated. If the more groups are dependent on each other or the group members are dependent on each other, there will be more chances of conflict in that particular group. If the groups are more interdependent to each other, there will be less chances of conflict between those two groups. So in this way, these structural components can lead to the chances of conflict or the initiation of the conflict process. Similarly, personality plays a very important role and the value system plays a very important role in initiating that conflict process. It includes the individual value systems and the personality characteristics. Certain personality types lead to the potential conflict. And most important is the differing value system. Value differences are the best explanation for the differences of opinions on the various matters. And this difference of opinions on the different matters will be again a sort of initiation of the conflict. So class, this is the first stage in which we have the idea that the conflict is going to arise. And what are the different sources of this initiation of the conflict? We discussed about the communication, structure, and the personal values, that how these components can initiate that process of conflict. The second stage of this conflict process is the cognition and personalization. Antecedent conditions lead to conflict only when the parties are affected by and aware of it. Conflict is personalized when it is felt and when the individuals become emotionally involved. So, in that sense, we can say that there are the two types of conflict. One is the perceived conflict, the other one is the felt conflict. Perceived conflict leads to the awareness by one or more parties of the existence of condition that create opportunities for the conflict to arise. Yani, the both one or the other parties perceives that there may be this sort of situation which can lead to the conflict in future. Now, this stage is where the conflict issues tend to be defined, and this definition delineates the possible settlements. At this stage of perceived conflict, we should define the what sort of conflict is being arising and how we can settle these issues. Then the second type, that is the felt conflict. That is the emotional involvement in a conflict, creating anxiety, tenseness, and frustration or hostility. So that is the real conflict which is personalized when it is felt, and when the individuals become emotionally involved in this particular sort of conflict. So at this stage they will have to define the different settlements about this particular conflict. Secondly, the emotions play a very major role in shaping the perceptions. The perception is very important, that how you perceive a particular sort of conflict situation. For example, some managers don't even perceive that there can be the conflict in the future, but some managers who are more proactive sort of managers, they can initially perceive that there may be the sort of conflict situation in the future, and they felt it and they try to settle it at the first instant. So emotions play a very important role in shaping the perceptions. There are two types of emotions. The first one is the negative emotions, and the other one is the positive feelings or positive emotions. Negative emotions produce oversimplification of issues, reduction in trust, and negative interpretations of the other party's behavior. So all these are the negative emotions which create a sort of conflict. The other one is the positive feelings, which increase the tendency to see potential relationships among the elements of the problem, to take a broader view of the situation, and to develop more innovative solutions. So these two emotions can create the important role when the conflict is being occurred. Negative emotions, if the manager has the negative emotions, it will reduce the trust. It will have the negative sort of interpretation of the other party's sort of behavior. But if the manager has the positive feelings and the positive emotions, he will try to develop something positive from this conflict. He will develop more innovative solutions in order to satisfy both of these conflicting parties. So the managers, while resolving and while personalizing the second stage of conflict, they will always try to be innovative, and they will try to have something positive from that sort of conflict. The third stage is the intentions stage. So this is the third stage, which is termed as intention stage in the conflict process. In this stage, the decisions to act in a given way, we decide that how we should act in a particular way. It depends. These intentions depends on two important things. The first one is the cooperativeness. The other one is the assertiveness. Cooperativeness leads to attempting to satisfy the other party's concerns. In this case, we always attempt to satisfy the opposing party's concerns. And the other one is the assertiveness. It attempts to satisfy one's own concerns. So both of these approaches can be used by the managers. They have both of these intentions. In case of cooperativeness, some sort of intention, they will try to satisfy the other party's concerns. And if they are more assertive in nature, then they will try to satisfy their own concerns first. So as far as this third stage of conflict process is concerned, there are the five conflict handling intentions can be identified. These these are sometimes also be considered as the conflict handling solutions to a particular conflict. One of the intention is the competing. It is a desire to satisfy one's interests regardless of the impact of the other parties to the conflict. So it is more assertive in nature. As I told you earlier, there are the two approaches. One is the cooperativeness, the other one is the assertiveness. So in the competing sort of intention, it is the desire to satisfy one's own interests regardless of the impact on the other parties to the conflict. So that is one of the approach which may be used by the managers, that they always try to satisfy their own interest and rarely caring about the interest of the other party. Now that is one of the approach which can be used under the different situations. The other one intention is the collaborating. It is a situation in which the parties to a conflict each desire to satisfy fully the concerns of all the other parties. Now this is the again cooperativeness sort of intention, in which the parties to a conflict each desire to satisfy fully concerns of the all other parties. So it is a sort of collaborating situations in which when the parties to the conflict, they will try to clarify the differences rather than by accommodating. They will clarify the differences in order to reach to a particular solution. So this strategy or this approach is termed as collaborating strategy. The third one approach is the avoiding. That is, a person may recognize that a conflict exists and want to withdraw from it or suppress it. So this is the desire to withdraw from or suppress a conflict. Now these are the different situations which can be used by the managers accordingly. These are the different approaches which can be used alternatively to resolve the different conflicting situations. In the third approach, avoiding, the parties usually withdraw from that point of conflict, or they try to suppress it. They don't want to solve it. They just withdraw that particular situation. In accommodating, the willingness of one party in a conflict to place the opponent's interest above or her over her own interest. So when one party seeks to appease an opponent, that party is willing to be self-sacrificing. So in this case, they will focus. One party will focus on the self-sacrificing, and they will take into account the other party's interest over their own particular interest. This situation is termed as accommodating. Then the last approach is termed as compromising approach. This is a situation in which each party to a conflict is willing to give up something. So this is a sort of sacrificing situation between the two different parties, in which one party sacrifice over something and the other party will also sacrifice over something. So when each party to the conflict seeks to give up something, sharing occurs, resulting in a compromised outcome. So there is no clear winner or loser in this particular situation, and the solution provides incomplete satisfaction of both the parties' concerns. So in the compromising sort of situation, one part, in between solution will be reached, which may be acceptable by both of the parties. We cannot say that one party is the winner and the other party is the loser. but this will be a sort of win-win situation in which both of the parties will win something and both of the parties will also lose something. So this situation or this intention will be termed as a compromising sort of situation or approach. Stage 4 of this conflict process is the behavior. Now this stage is where the conflict becomes visible. Up till the stage 3, the conflict is not actually happening, but we are only perceiving, the managers only perceive that there may be the conflict in the future, and they can use the different they can plan to use the different approaches as we discussed in stage 3 in order to resolve the conflict. But in the stage 4, the conflict actually becomes occurred or visible. The behavioral stage includes the statements, actions, and reactions made by the conflicting parties. These conflict behaviors are usually overt attempts to implement each party's intentions. So stage 4 is the dynamic process of interaction, and conflicts exist somewhere along a continuum, and it may have this stage may have the three different components, and at the first part of the component, the conflicts are characterized by the indirect and highly controlled form of tension. Then the conflict intensifies, escalates as they move upward and until they become highly destructive. Similarly, functional conflicts are typically confined to the other low range of the this conflict situation. So this in this situation, the use of the resolution and stimulation techniques to achieve the desired level of conflict will be occurred. And in this particular stage, the managers will use their behavioral solutions in order to resolve the conflict situation. Then comes the final stage, that is the outcomes of this conflict process. Now these outcomes, as we discussed earlier, may be functional, that is improving the group performance, or it may also be dysfunctional, that is hindering the group performance. Now what can be the functional outcomes from the conflict? It may increase the group performance. It may improve the quality of decisions. It may stimulate the creativity and innovation. It may encourage the interest and the curiosity of the different conflicting parties. It may provide a medium for problem solving. It creates an environment for self-evaluation and change. So these are the different functional outcomes, or which are desirable outcomes, which the most of the managers look from that conflict process. The other one are the dysfunctional outcomes. That is the uncontrolled opposition breeds discontent, which acts to dissolve common ties and eventually leads to the destruction of the group. So these are not these are the outcomes which are usually avoided, should be avoided by the different managers, because these sort of conflicts may rise due to the reward, dissent, and punish conflict avoiders. So the undesirable consequences of these dysfunctional outcomes are retarding communication, reductions in the group cohesiveness, and subordination of the group goals to the primacy of the infighting between the different members. So conflict can bring functioning to halt and potentially threaten the group's survival. What can be the dysfunctional outcomes of the conflict? So these are the wars which should be these are the things which should be avoided, or which the most of the managers want to avoid out of that conflict process. That is the development of the discontent, then reduced group cohesiveness and effectiveness, retarded communication, reduced group cohesiveness, infighting among group members overcomes group goals. So these are the functions which should be avoided by the managers out of that conflict process. So this was the overall conflict process, in which there are the different stages which we have just discussed. Let's discuss about another important term, that is the negotiation. Negotiation, again, the different managers, functional managers, strategic managers, and the project managers, they should always have the different negotiation, good negotiation skills. And believe me, if they have the good negotiation skills, they can compete anywhere, and they can always satisfy them, all of their stakeholders. So good negotiations are a very much important component of of the different managers' personality in order to become more success in the organizational settings. So what is the negotiation? It is a process in which two or more parties exchange goods or services and attempt to agree on the exchange rate for them. So again, these are sort of situation in which the different parties may have the different viewpoints, may have the different conflicting viewpoints, and you will have to have a sort of create a situation in which you will have to make both of the parties to agree on a particular point in order to exchange the different points in between. So you will have to reach a particular point which may be satisfied by both the parties, and that is the depending on your negotiation skills. Another term which we use in perspective of negotiation is the BATNA, that is the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. It means that whenever you have the situation that both of the parties cannot reach up to a particular situation which is being agreed by both the parties, then we always try to have a lowest acceptable value, which should be acceptable to an individual for that negotiating agreement. Now, if the two parties are not able to have a concise sort of situation which may be satisfied or which may be agreed upon by both the parties, then what we do, we try to have the lowest acceptable value on which we can, which may be acceptable to us and which may be accepted by the other party. So that situation is the termed as the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. There are two bargaining strategies. One is termed as the distributive bargaining, the other one is termed as the integrative bargaining. Let's discuss about the distributive bargaining. Negotiation that seeks to divide up a fixed amount of resources, that is the win-loss situation. Now again, we have already discussed the win-loss situation, that in this bargaining technique, we try to have the solution in which one of the party will be the winner and the other party will be the loser. We completely accept the viewpoint of one party, and we will completely reject the viewpoint of the other party, and that is usually termed as the win-loss situation. So this is termed as distributive bargaining. And the other type of bargaining is the integrative bargaining. Now it is the negotiation that seeks one or more settlements that can create a win-win situation. Now this is a situation in which some of the things are being accepted of one parties, and the other some things are to some extent we will accept the viewpoint of one party, and to some extent we will accept the viewpoint of the other party. So that is the win-win situation. So we do not completely reject the viewpoint of anyone's party, but we will accept something of everything, on which both of the parties will be agreed upon. So that situation is to be termed as win-win situation. Now let's discuss an example of win-win situation. Suppose you are selling some products to your customers, and you are giving the different items to a customer on credit. but of course you cannot give the credit to your customers to an indefinite for an indefinite period. In order to retain the customers, what you can do, you can involve the bank guarantee, that if you will if your customers will not be paid up to a certain period, then he will have to provide the bank guarantee. So we have a sort of situation which may be acceptable to the organization as well as may be acceptable to the customer. So this sort of situation in which we accept some views of one party as well as some views of the other party, that situation is termed as win-win sort of situation, or it is termed as integrative sort of bargaining, integrative bargaining. While doing the negotiation, there are the different important components which can affect this negotiation process. And let's discuss each of these components one by one. The first component is the role of personality traits in negotiation. For example, some people are very good negotiators while the others may not be the good negotiators and the bargainers. And that depends on the personality traits of the particular individuals who are doing the negotiation. So the role of personality traits in negotiation plays a very important role. The traits do not appear to have a significantly direct effect on the outcomes of either the bargaining or negotiating processes. So what the research says that these personality traits do not have a significant direct or indirect effect on the outcomes of either the bargaining or the negotiation process. Now, these results are on the basis of certain research which is done by the different theories. So, overall assessments of the personality negotiation relationships finds that the personality traits will have no significant direct effect on either the bargaining process or the negotiation process. Let's discuss about the gender differences in the negotiation. Now again class, this is on the basis of the research which is done by the different theories. For example, men and women do not negotiate differently. Both have the same negotiating patterns. Now this is one of the research, one of the conclusion of one research. And sometimes we can say that women negotiate no differently from men, although men apparently negotiate slightly better outcomes. And the comparison between the experienced male and female managers find women are neither worse nor better negotiators, neither more cooperative nor open to the other, neither more nor less persuasive nor threatening than the other men. The belief that women are nice is probably due to the confusing gender and the lack of power typically held by the women. So, women's attitude towards negotiation and their success negotiators are less favorable than men's. Now, again, all of these assumptions are based on the particular research. Similarly, the cultural differences are important in the negotiations. Negotiating styles clearly varies across the national cultures. For example, the Chinese also draw out negotiations, but that is because they believe negotiations never end. Now, Chinese are very popular about the negotiations and bargaining. Whenever you do the trading with the Chinese, they will say that negotiations will never end. There is no end point of the negotiation, and they will always be, they're always trying to satisfy their customers at any point. Similarly, Americans are known around the world for their impatience and their desire to be liked. They are more considered impatient as far as the American negotiators are concerned. Similarly, the French like the conflict. They gain the recognition and develop their reputation by thinking and acting against others. So these are the different perceptions about the different national cultures about the negotiation. There are some other approaches which can be used in the negotiation. One is the mediator. We can involve the third party in order to do the negotiation or in order to resolve the conflict between the different parties. And that situation is termed as mediator. Is a neutral third party who facilitates a negotiated solution by using reasoning, persuasion, and suggestions for the alternatives. So whenever there is a sort of dispute between the two different parties, then the organizations usually involve a third party, which is known as mediator, who will resolve the conflict between these parties. So this setting is termed as mediation. There is another approach used which is termed as arbitrator. Now, arbitrator is almost similar to that mediator, but there is a difference in arbitrator. In arbitrator, actually the court appoints a particular person or particular party in order to resolve the conflict. In case of mediator, there is a more informal process in which court do not involve. But in case of arbitrator, there will be something involvement of authority or the legal authority, which is going through which we can resolve the conflict between the different parties. So arbitrator is the third party to a negotiation who has the authority to dictate an agreement. Now that is usually the legal authority who is going to dispute the settlement between the different parties. So that is the basic difference between the mediator and the arbitrator. The concept is same, but the only difference is that the mediator is a sort of more informal process in which we involve a third party in order to resolve the conflict between the different conflicting parties. And while arbitrator, it involves usually a third party which has the more legal authority in order to resolve the conflict between the different parties. And the decision of that arbitrator is usually binding upon both of these parties. And this is more a formal process as compared to the mediator. Similarly, another approach is there that is termed as conciliator, a trusted third party who provides an informal communication link between the negotiator and the opponent. Again, this is again similar to the mediator, that a third party which is mutually being agreed or being trusted by both the parties. And this is again more informal process. It involves the informal communication between the different conflicting parties, and that conciliator will finally reach to a particular solution which is being agreed upon by both the parties. Then another approach is termed as consultant. It is an impartial third party skilled in conflict management who attempts to facilitate creative problem solving through the communication and analysis. Now, this is a more formal process in which we involve a consultant who is expert in resolving the conflict or who knows about the conflict management. He is involved to resolve the conflict and to initiate the negotiation process between the different parties. So this is again a more formal process. In this process, there is also a third party, but that is more expert and skilled in conflict management, and who attempts to facilitate creative problem solving through the communication and through the different analysis. So that is the more formal process of negotiating and resolving the conflicts between the two different parties. Now we discussed the different approaches which we can use in the conflict process, of which the first one was the competition. So let's discuss about the situations in which we use this approach, that is the competition approach, competing approach. So let's discuss about the conflict handling intention, that is competition. Now, this competing situation will be more favorable when quick decision action is vital in emergencies or the important issues. When there are very important issues for the managers, for the organizations, for the which are most important to the viability of the organizations, or when there are the emergency situations and you have to take the quick decisions, then this approach will be more suitable and more better. Where unpopular actions need implementing in cost cutting, enforcing unpopular rules, discipline. Now, in the in competing sort of situation, we discussed that we usually focus on the win-loss situation. Now, in win-loss situation, one party is the winner. We accept the viewpoint of one party and we completely reject the viewpoint of the other party. So this is a sort of situation which is not usually popular situation, and we'll have to enforce this sort of situation to the parties. So we'll have to be care about the discipline. So whenever the unpopular actions are required to be implementable, we use this sort of strategy, that is competing. Similarly, on issues vital to the organization's welfare, we will have to use this competing situation, and we'll have to use that win-loss sort of situation when you know you are right. For example, if you are 100% sure that one party is on the right side and the other party is completely on the wrong side, then again you will have to use this approach, that is competing approach, against the people who take advantage of the non-competitive behavior. Now again, sometimes win-loss situation is should be adopted for those people who are completely having the non-competitive behavior, who are non-cooperative in nature. In that particular sense, again, we'll have to we have the win-loss sort of decisions which are inclined towards that competing strategy which we have earlier discussed. The second approach we discussed is about the collaboration. Now let's discuss that what are the different situations in which we can use this collaboration strategy. We can use it to find an integrative solution when both sets of concerns are too important to be compromised. Now again, these are sort of collaborating strategy in which we accept the viewpoint of both of the parties. To find an integrative solution is the ultimate the objective of the negotiator and the dispute resolver. And this is a situation, this approach will be used under the situations when both the sets of the concerns are too important to be compromised. So we cannot have the win-loss situation or win-loss situation sort of decision in this sort of situation. So when your objective is to learn or to emerge insights from the people with the different perspective, you will have to see the people from the different perspectives. Then you will have to use this collaboration sort of approach to gain commitment by incorporating concerns into a consensus. So whenever you want to be committed to have a sort of consensus between the two different parties, then again you will use collaborating approach to work through feelings that have interfered with the relationship. So in order to have the good relationships between both of the parties, you just avoid the win-loss situation and you will go towards the more collaborating sort of approach, that is the win-win approach. Now the third approach which we have just discussed is the avoidance. Now this approach will be more suitable when an issue is trivial or more important issues are pressing. When you perceive that no chance of satisfying your concerns, when you have the idea that your concerns may not be satisfied, then you try to avoid the situation. Now this approach is particularly important in this sort of situation when potential disruption outweighs the benefits of resolution. When you have the idea or you perceive that your benefits will not be there and the disturbance will be there in case of conflict handling situation, then you focus towards you try to avoid this situation. When gathering information supersedes immediate decision, or when others can resolve the conflict effectively. So when you think that the conflict cannot be resolved effectively by yourself, you can avoid it. When issue seems tangential or sympathetic of the other issues. When this important the issue which is going to be resolved is not so important as compared to the other issues, then you do use this avoidance sort of situation or approach. Accommodation approach is used or better under the situations when you find that you are wrong and to allow a better position to be heard. In this particular situation, you try to accommodate the other party to learn and to show your reasonableness that the other party's concerns is more important for you, and you trust on the other party's viewpoint, and you try to accept it. When issues are more important to others than to yourself, and to satisfy others and maintain the cooperation. So in this particular situation, you try to accommodate the other party because the issues may be more important to the others as compared to your own self. To build social credits for later issues. So sometimes we also accommodate the other party in order to have the better relationships in the future, or in relation to the other issues. To minimize loss when outmatched and losing, when harmony and stability are especially important. To allow employees to develop by learning from mistakes. So this sort of situation, that is accommodation approach, is usually applied under these sort of situations when we try to accommodate the other party, when we try to give more weightage to the other parties point of view in order to have better positions with that party in the future. Then the last approach, that is the compromise approach, is better when the goals are important but not worth the effort or potential disruption of more assertive approaches. So in this case, the assertive approach is not considered important, but you focus more towards the cooperative sort of situation when the opponents with equal power are committed to mutually exclusive goals. So you, in this particular situation, you will have to compromise on the different viewpoints of the both of the parties, because these may include towards the mutually exclusive goals. Mutually exclusive goals are those goals which cannot be agreed by both the parties at the same time. So in this particular case, you will have to compromise. You will have to have the win-win sort of situation. Both of the parties will have to compromise on something. So you may approach towards win-win sort of situation, so that some point of view may be accepted to one party, and for the some point of view may be accepted for the other party. So it whenever you are trying to arrive at sort of solutions under the time pressure, or when it is backed up by the collaboration or competition is unsuccessful, the sort of situation, then you try to reach the compromise sort of situation, and you try to have the more win-win sort of situation. So class, this discussion was all about the different situations under which we can use the different conflict resolution techniques like competing, compromising, collaborating, avoidance sort of techniques. Okay, in this slide, I will sum up the different strategies which we have just discussed in this conflict resolution the process. And this technique or this continuum is termed as alternate dispute resolution techniques. We just discussed the different sort of formal and informal processes in order to resolve the conflict between the two different parties, in which we discussed about the mediation, we discussed about the arbitration, and litigation, arbitration, in which more litigation and the court sort of more formalized sort of decisions are being reached. So this all of these approaches are being set up in this particular graph, which tells us about the different strategies which can be used in order to resolve the conflicts between the two different parties. Now, when you see this graph, there are the two extremes. One extreme is the more informal in nature, in which we use the informal sort of technique in order to resolve the conflict between the two different parties. On the other extreme is the formal sort of approach, in which more formalized process is being adopted in order to resolve the conflict between the two different parties. We have already discussed about these formal and informal approaches in order to resolve the conflict between the two different parties. Now, what happens in the informal sort of situation or informal sort of approach? The different parties retain control over the process. That's why this is the more informal process. So at one of the extreme in which we use more informal approach, both of the parties can discuss with each other in order to resolve the issues between them. On the other extreme is the formal approach, in which the parties seize control over the process, in which there is no control over the parties. They cannot decide about the dispute in between them, but a third party or the third court or the authority will decide about the dispute between the two different parties. So these are the two different approaches in between the informal and the formal approaches. So these are the two extremes. So when we talk about the negotiation or when we talk about the facilitation, this is the more of the informal process in which the different parties can facilitate each other, can negotiate with each other in order to find a particular solution which may be acceptable by both of the parties. Now, ahead of these two negotiation and facilitation techniques comes the mediation technique, in which now the parties do not have the control over the process. The control of the decision process goes towards the third party. Now in the mediation, as we discussed earlier, the third party will decide about the dispute between the two different parties. So this is in this way we are moving towards more formalization of the dispute handling process. And along with the more formal and informal approach, there is another thing which has been discussed in this continuum, that is the consensus. Whenever we are more informal in deciding the dispute, we will have the more consensus, which consensus means the consensus between both of the conflicting parties. Whenever we goes towards the more formal process, it will be again the more adjudicative in nature. Adjudicative means that there may or may not be the consensus, but that decision will have to be binded over towards all of the parties, whether they have the consensus or not. So after the mediation, we also discussed about the arbitration. Arbitration is again a more formal process. That is the same process as that of mediation, but the thing is, the facilitator or the mediator, which is used to for the authority in order to resolve the conflict between the two different parties, he has more legal authority to resolve the conflict as compared to the mediation. Sometimes court will decide about a particular person or the individual who is usually appointed by the court, who has the particular legal authority to resolve the conflict. So you see how we move from the informal process to the more formal process. Then after the arbitration, then comes the litigation, and in which the court involves in order to resolve the conflict between the two different parties. So these are the different approaches which may vary from the informal approach toward the more formal approach. And this ADR continuum, alternate dispute resolution continuum, guides us to decide about the process or the negotiation, that how we can resolve the conflict between the two different parties by using the approach which may be more informal in nature at one extreme, or it may be more formal in nature at the other extreme. Similarly, resolving the stakeholder disputes may have the different approaches. Now, some of the approaches we have already discussed, like integrative and relational approach, in which the problem is win-win. We try to have the win-win sort of situation, we try to compromise is made by both of the parties, and we will try to have the situation which may be acceptable by both of the parties. This is the more value creating sort of situation, and we accommodate as many interests as possible among the different parties. On the other way out is the distributive approach, in which we target the zero sum approach. In that is the win loss sort of situation, in which one party is the winner, the other party is the loser. Divide the pie. We usually term it divide the pie. We will have to divide the pie among the different parties. Splitting, we try in this approach we try to split the difference between the two different parties. On the other way out is the relationship building approach, in which we believe in dialogue in order to resolve the conflict between the two different parties. The fourth approach is the competition or the more power-based approach, in which we use the authoritative sort of style in order to resolve the conflicts between the two different parties. Now class, let's discuss about the 6 different steps in resolving the issues. In one of the lectures, we discussed about the environmental scanning, in which we discussed about the different organizational environments, external environment, internal environment, and task environment. Now, you see that in this slide, this environmental scanning has again become the first important step in resolving the issue between the different parties. Now, because environmental scanning is so important, that you have to identify the environments, and these environmental forces will help you identify that what are the important issues which maybe arise in the future. It will guide you about the SWOT, strength, weakness, opportunities, and threats for the organizations. So environmental scanning is the first step in order to identify a particular issue. Then after this identification, we will analyze that issue, that whether this issue, how much that issue is important for the organization, and accordingly in the next step we will have to rank these issues, and we will have to prioritize the different issues. If there are the different issues, then we'll have to prioritize it, that what is the most important issue and what is the least important issue for the organization. Then we'll have to decide about the issue resolution, strategizing, how we can resolve these issues. We have already discussed the different approaches which can be used for this issue resolutions, and these approaches may vary from the more formal process on one end and to the more informal process to the other end, like mediation, arbitration, third party usage, and consultants. We also discuss about, we can use the experts, conflict management experts in order to resolve the conflicts. So in this fourth step, we will have to decide about this particular strategy, that which particular strategy will be used to resolve the conflict between the different parties. Then issues, response, and implementation. We will apply this strategy, and then we will see that what is the response of that strategy in order to resolve those issues, and we finally implement it. And again, we'll have to continuously monitor it and evaluate it. So in order to resolve any issue, or in order to manage the particular issues in the organization, we will have to follow these 6-step approach. There may be the different approaches which may have been discussed by the different theories, but in this particular lecture I have discussed this 6-step issue management approach. So let's discuss about the suggested corporate actions whenever the crisis is there in the organization. The managers will have to face the problem. Whenever there is an issue, you will have to face it. Either ignoring that problem will not serve the purpose. You will have to face the problem, and you have to make an attempt in order to resolve it. If you will try to ignore that problem, then again that will become the more serious issue in the future. Take your lumps, don't avoid it. You will have to lead from the front, and you will have to perceive the problem, and finally you will have to make an attempt in order to resolve it. then recognize that there is no such thing as a secret or private crisis. You don't have to hide anything. You will have to open everything. You have to open it for the for discussion with the different stakeholders in order to have the different viewpoints that how you can resolve the problem. Stage war games, you should be creating an emergency situation in order to resolve the problem or the issue. So you have to create an emergency and urgency in order to resolve the problem. Use the firm's philosophy, motto, or mission statement. Use the different guidelines which are available in the organization in the form of the mission statement, how the different problems can be solved under the guideline, under the umbrella of mission and vision of the organization. Then use the firm's closeness to the customers and end users for early feedback. Again, as I said, that you'll have to take the feedback from the different stakeholders, and of course the customers are the most important stakeholders. You have to take the feedback from them, and then that will help you to solve the problem and resolve the issue. Prerequisites for the issues crisis management success. What are the prerequisites? What are the different assumptions on which this strategy issue resolve strategy will be successful? One of the most important prerequisite or the assumption is the top management support. If the top management is there, their support is there, they actively participates in this issue resolution management process, then it will be more successful. Otherwise, if the top management is not committed and they are not supportive, it will be very difficult for the managers to resolve the different issues. Involvement is cross departmental. So any issue should not be retained up to a particular department. Different cross departmental orientation should be introduced. They should the different departments and the different functions should mutually discuss the things with each other in order to have the more better solution for the overall organizations. The issue management unit fits with the firm's culture. Now again, whatever the unit is there, in order to resolve the issues, they should always keep in mind the firm's overall culture, and especially that is important when you hire a third party consultant who is going to resolve the conflict, or who is going to resolve the conflict between the different parties. Then he has to care about the organization's own culture, because when you are involving the third party or the outsider as the expert, he may not be very visible about the company's own culture. So he has to study the organization culture, and accordingly he will have to decide a particular solution which may be acceptable, culturally acceptable to the organization and the stakeholders. Output instead of process is the focus. Now that is the main mistake which we usually do in resolving the different conflicts. We just focus on the process and we just ignore the outcome. That is not the right approach. We should focus on the output, and accordingly we will have to decide the supportive process. So our final focus should be on the output instead of the process and instead of the different people. So class, up till now we have discussed about the conflict and negotiation management techniques. Now let's briefly discuss about the stress. Now, as we discussed in the conflict, that conflict may not always be disadvantageous to the organization. It may also be very helpful for the organization. The same is true for the stress. We usually take the stress in always negative terms, but that is not true. Stress may also be up to a particular level that may be there in order to have the better performance within the organization. Now let's discuss the definition. Let's discuss the definition of stress. It is a dynamic condition in which an individual is confronted with an opportunity, constraint, or demand related to what he or she desires, and for which the outcome is perceived be both uncertain and important. Now again, stress is usually comprised of the different situations. Now, what are these situations? Usually, the stress is there whenever you are confronted with an opportunity. Whenever you have a particular opportunity, you may be experiencing the stress. Similarly, other than the opportunity, if you have some constraints, you have some hurdles in doing something, again the stress will be there. Or the demand related to what you desires. For example, if you want to achieve something, and for that achievement you need the particular demands, again the stress will be there. So these are the particular conditions on which under which the stress conditions will be there, and for which the outcomes is perceived to be both uncertain and the important. And usually the stress is being there whenever the outcome is important for you, very important for you, and that is also uncertain. For example, you are not certain about achieving that particular outcome. So these are the different conditions which constitute a sort of stress situation. The constraints, forces that prevent the individuals from doing what they desire. So if you want to achieve something, then all the hurdles and which prevent the individuals from achieving those particular things, all these things constitute as the constraints. Similarly, the demand, the losing of something desired. This probability of losing something is usually termed as the different demands. And both of these constraints and the demands are the prerequisites of the stress sort of situation. Now, there are the different potentials of the stress. There are many sources of stress and the potential sources of stress, but the most important sources or the factors may be the environmental factors. For example, the economic uncertainties of the business cycle. If your business is not on the growth, and you are on the declining, your business is on the declining sort of stage, and due to those economic hurdles you are facing, again these factors may be the sort of stress. Political uncertainties of the political systems. Usually we say that whenever there is the political stability, there will be the certainty and there will be less stress. And whenever there is the political instability, there will be the uncertainty and there will be the more stress. Technological uncertainties, certainties of the technical innovations. So as you can see that in the technological environment and the telecommunication environment, there are so much technological innovations, and these innovations occur so quickly that the managers will have to be vigilant in order to cope with these technological changes. So whenever these technological uncertainties are there, the stress will be there, and these are the potential sources of stress. Similarly, terrorism in threats to physical safety and security within the organization, these can be also the factors which may lead to the stress. There are some organizational factors like task demands related to the job. What are the demands? What are the goals to be achieved? These goals itself may be a sort of a source of stress. Role demands of functioning in an organization. What role you are playing in that particular organization? That role itself plays a cause of creating that stress. Interpersonal demands created by other employees. Similarly, organizational structures, these rules, policies, regulations, all these policies and organizational structures again create this sort of stress. For example, you can see that in some public sector organizations, due to these rules, obsolete rules, there will be the more stress you must have seen in the government employees, as compared to the multinational sort of companies. Organizational leadership style again there. In some organizations, they are the traditional style of management, and in some organizations, there is the innovative and the dynamic style of leadership are there. So these styles of the leadership can also be the potential source of stress. Then organization life stage, that is again very important. If your organization in the growth stage or the stability stage, there will be less stress. But if the organization is on the decline stage, your sales are declining, your income is declining, of course the stress level will be there, and that will also be reflected in the individual stress. Similarly, the individual factors can also be the potential source of stress, like family background, your personal relationships with your family, with your relatives, with your colleagues, with your peers. That can also be play a very important role towards creating the stress situation. Then economic problems you have. That economic problems is usually a very important source of stress, especially in the countries like Pakistan, low income countries. That is the problem everywhere, personality problems arising from the basic disposition, that depends on your background, that your behavior, your attitudes, your own personality can be a sort of stress. Then individual differences, perceptual variations of how reality will affect the individual's future. These differences between the different individuals can also be the source of stress. Your own perception of something, that how you will act in the future, that can be a sort of potential stress. Greater job experience moderates stress effects. The more you will have the experience on the job, the less stress you will face. सोशल सपोर्ट बफर्स जॉब स्ट्रेस. अगर आपके पास सोशल सपोर्ट आपको मिल रही है आपकी ऑर्गेनाइजेशन की तरफ से, आपके पेयर्स की तरफ से, आपके बॉसेस की तरफ से, देन देयर विल बी लेस स्ट्रेस. Similarly, internal focus of control lowers the perceived job stress, and strong feelings of self-efficacy reduce the reactions to job stress. Self-efficacy means if you have the belief on yourself that you can do something, then of course there will be less stress. But if you believe initially that you cannot do something or important, then again that may be a sort of potential source for stress for you. So consequences of stress, they can maybe the different consequences of stress. High level of stress may lead to the different physiological symptoms, may lead to the psychological symptoms, and may lead to the different behavioral symptoms. Now again class, as I discussed earlier, that a particular level of stress may be helpful for the organization and the individuals in order to boost up their performance. But whenever that stress will be beyond that level, that will be dangerous for the organization as for the individuals. And these dangerous level of stress, or this level of stress may create the different symptoms like physiological symptoms, psychological symptoms, and behavioral symptoms. Now these physiological symptoms may be leading to the different medical problems you have. You may have the headache, you may have the heart problem, blood pressure problem. So these are the different physiological symptoms. Then psychological symptoms be there, may be there. And similarly behaviors, your behavior may be entirely changed with your peers, and your attitude will be entirely different in this situation of that stress. So these are the different consequences of stress. Now, how we can manage the stress? They can be the different individual approaches. They can be the different organizational approaches. Now, in order to reduce the stress, you will have to manage the time. Time is a very important source of stress nowadays. You always have the limited time, and you have a lot of things to do within that particular time. So if you are going to manage your time, you will be able to manage much of your stress. Similarly, increasing the physical exercise, that is very important. That will again refresh your mind in order to do the certain things, and your stress level will be reduced. Relaxation training, again you'll have to relax sometime with your family, with your have this sort of recreation, so that you can be more comfortable in order to handle the different things. Expanding social support network, you should have to have meeting with the different friends, with your social units, with your social contacts, in that particular way. It will be helpful to manage the stress, and you will be feeling more comfortable. Similarly, organizational approaches can be used to manage the stress, like improve the personal selection and job placement. By adopting the different selection and the placement techniques, you can manage the stress. The organization may have the different training sessions in order to manage the stress. Use of realistic goal setting. Goal setting, if the goals are more competitive, realistic, Then again, the source of stress among the individuals will be less. Redesigning of the jobs. I have discussed already in one of the lecture about re-engineering the different process, that jobs and its contents itself are the sources of stress for most of the individuals. Mostly these old and obsolete procedures and the rules which are prevailing in the organizations, that has to be changed in order to manage the stress level in the individuals and the employers. Similarly, employee involvement strategies should be used. We'll have to participate the employees. We'll have to give the authority to the employees, delegate the authority to the employees in order to make their decisions. That will also be helpful to reduce the stress level. Improved organizational communication should be there. The communication channel should be improved in order to resolve or in order to reduce the stress level. Then establishment of the corporate wellness programs. Now these employee and wellness programs are again may be very helpful for the management of stress within the organization. So that's all class about the 2 days process, about 2 days lecture, about which we have discussed about conflict management, negotiation management, and stress management. That's all for today. Allah Hafiz.